For centuries, human history has been told as a story of gradual evolution. Small groups of hunter-gatherers banding together, building villages, and eventually rising into the first civilizations. Yet hidden within old manuscripts, buried newspaper articles, archaeological reports, and even genetic studies, there lingers a far stranger narrative, one suggesting that the Earth was once home to beings of enormous size. Beings who walked beside ordinary humans, built vast monuments, and then seemed to vanish almost entirely, leaving behind only fragments of bone, puzzling myths, and whispered legends of giants. At first glance, such stories sound like the stuff of folklore. Children's tales of ogres and titans, myths of demigods with superhuman strength, or biblical accounts of beings like the Nephilim, creatures described as towering offspring of divine beings and mortals. But when one begins to compare these stories across cultures, whether in ancient Sumer, Greece, India, the Americas, or the Pacific, a pattern begins to emerge. Civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years nonetheless repeat the same motif, that once upon a time, the world was inhabited by men of unusual size and power. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across the United States frequently carried astonishing headlines. Reports told of farmers digging up skeletons measuring 7, 8, even 9 feet tall in fields, mounds, and caves. Archaeological expeditions in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys allegedly uncovered burial mounds containing unusually large bones, some accompanied by copper ornaments and weapons far too heavy for a typical man to wield. These discoveries were often written up with excitement but rarely followed through with long-term scientific study. Many specimens, according to reports, were shipped to the Smithsonian Institution only to disappear from the record. This pattern has led some researchers to speculate about deliberate suppression, whether remains dismissed as anomalies, misidentified, or quietly archived away to protect conventional narratives about human evolution. The Smithsonian itself has long denied any such conspiracy, but the persistence of these accounts has fueled suspicion. If even a fraction of them are true, it would suggest a branch of humanity with physical dimensions that fall well outside the accepted norm. But bones are not the only clues. Myths worldwide speak of enormous builders. In ancient Greece, the Cyclopes were said to have stacked the megalithic walls of Mycenae and Tiryns, walls so massive that later Greeks believed no ordinary human could have moved them. In the Old Testament, the Anakim and Rephaim are described as tribes of giants inhabiting Canaan, feared by the Israelites. Norse sagas tell of Jotnar, frost giants older than the gods themselves. Across the ocean, Native American traditions preserve stories of gigantic red-haired beings who were eventually destroyed in great battles. Polynesian oral history, too, describes great stone-moving ancestors who were taller and stronger than those who came after. Skeptics often dismiss these tales as exaggerations, symbolic metaphors for rival tribes, or mythological flourishes. Yet what if they preserve a kernel of memory, an oral record of an actual race or population that once walked among humans? The genetic revolution of the 21st century has added new intrigue. In 2018, a Harvard-led study of ancient DNA rocked the academic world. Researchers discovered that the builders of Stonehenge, the Neolithic farmers of Britain, were suddenly and almost completely replaced by newcomers from continental Europe. Within a few generations, the genetic signature of the island's original inhabitants vanished almost entirely. It was as if an entire people had been erased, leaving little trace in the DNA of modern Britons. Scholars interpreted this as evidence of migration and cultural replacement, yet for some, it raises a deeper question: what forces, natural or otherwise, sweep away entire populations so completely? Other genetic puzzles complicate the story. Studies of Native American lineages in the 1990s revealed haplogroups tracing back to Asia, as expected, but also identified rare lineages that seemed out of place, difficult to connect to known migration patterns. Some researchers hinted at the possibility of an ancient population that does not fit neatly into the standard model of peopling the Americas. While mainstream science does not associate these anomalies with giants, those who pursue alternative histories suggest they might represent the lingering genetic echoes of an older, taller population now mostly lost. Archaeology also leaves us with structures that defy simple explanation. Around the world stand megaliths weighing tens or even hundreds of tons, quarried and moved without modern machinery. From Baalbek in Lebanon, where stones the size of railroad cars form the base of a platform, to the great trilithons of Stonehenge. To the colossal statues of Easter Island, human ingenuity is undeniable, but the scale raises questions. Were ordinary human societies alone responsible, or did they inherit techniques or even assistance from beings stronger and larger than themselves? Even in modern times, anomalous skeletons occasionally surface. In the deserts of Nevada, legends speak of the Site-Ka, a race of red-haired giants said to have warred with local tribes. In the Lovelock Cave, excavations uncovered unusually large artifacts, oversized sandals, massive tools alongside human remains. While much of this evidence has been contested or lost, the echoes of the story persist, refusing to die. When we place these threads together, ancient myth, missing bones, megalithic enigmas, and genetic puzzles, a provocative picture begins to form. Perhaps giants did not exist everywhere, nor dominate entire continents, but pockets of unusual populations may have thrived in deep antiquity. They may have intermarried with smaller humans, leaving behind hybrids remembered as demigods or heroes. Or they may have been wiped out entirely, their memory lingering only in myth and rumor. Take the Bible, for example. The book of Genesis describes the Nephilim, offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, as mighty men of old, men of renown. These were said to be beings of exceptional stature and strength. Later biblical texts describe tribes such as the Anakim and the Rephaim, giants who occupied the land of Canaan before the arrival of the Israelites. When the Hebrew spies first surveyed the region, they reported feeling like grasshoppers compared to the towering figures they saw. These accounts were not presented as metaphor, but as matter-of-fact observations of real populations. Far from the Middle East, the same themes appear. In the Americas, native traditions across multiple tribes recount encounters with giants. The Paiute people of Nevada tell of the Titi-Cha, red-haired giants who lived in the region's caves. According to the legend, these beings were fierce and cannibalistic, eventually destroyed when the Paiute ancestors set fire to their refuge at Lovelock Cave. In the 20th century, excavations of that cave uncovered oversized sandals, tools, and skeletal fragments, finds that seem to align eerily with the oral tradition. Though mainstream archaeology has downplayed these discoveries, the correspondence between myth and artifact is difficult to dismiss outright. In South America, legends of giants extend back to the first European explorers. When Spanish chroniclers reached Patagonia in the 16th century, they reported encounters with indigenous people of great size, so tall that the name Patagon itself became synonymous with giants. While some of these accounts may have exaggerated the stature of local tribes, the frequency of such reports suggests that the idea of giant inhabitants was a persistent one, not a singular fantasy. Travel eastward, and the stories continue. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, powerful beings who descended from the heavens and were often depicted as larger than ordinary humans. In India, the Mahabharata describes warriors of immense size who wielded colossal weapons. In Norse mythology, the Jotnar giants of ice and stone were said to be the primordial beings from which the cosmos was shaped. Polynesian myths recount the Menahun, small people, but also tales of massive stone-moving ancestors who could shift weights that defy modern machinery. Across the Pacific, in Micronesia, legends credit giant builders with raising megalithic structures such as Nan Madol, a city of basalt columns that seems far beyond the capacity of its time. The architectural evidence is equally compelling. Consider Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon, where the stone of the pregnant woman, a single block of limestone, weighs an estimated 1,000 tons. How was it quarried, moved, and positioned in antiquity? Even with today's cranes, such a feat would push engineering to its limits. At Stonehenge, the great sarsen stones weigh up to 25 tons each, dragged from miles away. Easter Island's Moai statues, carved from volcanic rock, stand up to 33 feet tall and weigh more than 80 tons. Conventional archaeology explains these as feats of human ingenuity, requiring vast coordination and clever engineering. But alternative historians ask, could such structures hint at the involvement of beings physically capable of manipulating such weights directly? Skeptics rightly caution against overreach. Human societies are extraordinarily resourceful. With ropes, levers, sledges, and sheer determination, ancient builders could accomplish remarkable tasks. Yet the psychological impression remains. Many ancient sites feel as though they were designed for people larger than ourselves. Doorways cut into cyclopean walls often rise well above human height. Tools discovered in some contexts appear oversized, almost impractical for the hands of ordinary men. Whether by design or coincidence, the architecture of antiquity seems to whisper of larger builders. One of the most controversial aspects of the giant question involves missing evidence. In the late 19th century, reports of giant skeletons appeared with surprising frequency in American newspapers. Farmers plowing fields, construction crews digging foundations, and archaeologists opening burial mounds claimed to uncover human remains measuring far above normal height. Some reports described skeletons 7 feet tall, others 8 or 9, and occasionally even taller. In many cases, the discoveries were said to be collected by authorities or shipped to institutions, never to be displayed again. Critics argue that such reports were sensationalized journalism or misinterpretations of large animal bones. Supporters counter that the sheer volume of reports and the consistency of the measurements suggests something more. The Smithsonian Institution is often named in these stories, accused of having collected and then quietly hidden away giant skeletons to preserve a tidy evolutionary timeline. The Smithsonian itself has repeatedly denied such claims, calling them unfounded conspiracy theories, yet the rumors persist, fueled by the institution's undeniable role as gatekeeper of America's archaeological record. If even a handful of these accounts were genuine, they would dramatically alter our picture of human history. Adding to the mystery are isolated cases of giant skeletons, documented outside the Americas. In the 19th century, French missionaries in Algeria reported uncovering skeletons measuring nearly 12 feet in length. In the Philippines, stories circulated of oversized bones unearthed in caves. Even in Ireland, 19th century newspapers told of enormous femurs and skulls discovered during quarrying. Each report on its own might be dismissed as exaggeration, error, or hoax. Taken together, however, they create a chorus that refuses to be silenced. Science itself occasionally brushes against these mysteries. Acromegaly and gigantism are recognized medical conditions caused by hormonal imbalances that can lead individuals to grow to unusual heights. The tallest modern human on record, Robert Wadlow of Illinois, stood nearly 9 feet tall. But he was a rare anomaly, his extraordinary height resulting from a pituitary tumor. Proponents of the giant hypothesis argue that while isolated cases exist today, ancient populations may have carried genetic traits that produced groups of unusually large humans, not just individuals. Over time, those traits may have been bred out, diluted, or lost in population replacements. The question of giants also intersects with flood myths. Nearly every ancient culture tells a story of a cataclysmic flood that wiped away an earlier world. In many of these traditions, the giants or their progenitors are said to have been destroyed in the deluge. In the biblical account, the Nephilim are present before the flood of Noah, but their descendants linger afterward, feared and fought by later generations. In Greek mythology, the Gigantomachy describes a great war in which the gods battled against giants. Such stories often serve as transitional myths, marking the end of an age dominated by powerful beings and the beginning of the human era we know. What emerges is a strange paradox. On the one hand, mainstream science insists that giants' entire populations of humans standing 8, 9, or 10 feet tall have never existed. On the other hand, cultures across the world independently preserve stories of them, while scattered archaeological and genetic anomalies seem to hint at their reality. The boundary between myth and history blurs, and the absence of definitive evidence does not erase the persistence of the narrative. If giants truly walked the earth, the implications would shake the very foundations of human history. They would not be a trivial footnote, but a profound chapter missing from our textbooks. Their existence would force us to reconsider the origins of civilization, the meaning of myth, and even humanity's place in the world. But where did these beings come from, and why are they remembered with such awe and sometimes with such fear? One theory holds that giants were simply a natural branch of humanity, an ancient population carrying genetic traits that made extraordinary stature more common than it is today. Just as Homo floresiensis, the hobbit species, proves that smaller humans once existed, could there also have been a macro hominin, a population of oversized people whose remains are now scarce? If so, their disappearance might have been the result of environmental change, interbreeding with smaller populations, or even targeted conflict that led to their eradication. But many ancient traditions suggest something more otherworldly. The biblical Nephilim, for instance, are described as the offspring of divine beings and human women. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were portrayed as descending from the heavens, often depicted with extraordinary stature and authority. In Mesoamerican myths, sky gods and feathered serpents interact with humanity, sometimes bestowing knowledge, sometimes unleashing destruction. Could it be that legends of giants are distorted memories of encounters with beings not entirely human? If so, they may not have been a separate race of men, but something else, something liminal, standing between myth and biology. For those who interpret myths through a symbolic lens, giants often represent the chaotic forces of nature, or the primal ancestors of humankind. In Greek mythology, the Gigantes rose against the Olympian gods in a battle that symbolized the taming of chaos and the triumph of order. In Norse tales, the Jotnar embody raw natural power, frost, fire, stone standing in opposition to the structured cosmos of the gods. From this perspective, the ubiquity of giants in myth does not necessarily prove their existence, but rather shows how universal the human need was to imagine beings greater, larger, and more formidable than ourselves. To fight giants, in story, is to prove human courage. To inherit their legacy is to claim divine strength. Yet the persistence of physical evidence, however fragmentary, complicates the picture. Oversized bones reported in burial mounds, massive tools, enormous sandals, and megalithic architecture all suggest that something more than symbolism may be at play. Even if the majority of these discoveries are exaggerations, hoaxes, or misunderstandings, could a core of them represent genuine anomalies? History is full of inconvenient finds that were dismissed at first, only to be vindicated later. The discovery of Troy, once considered a legend, proved that myths can sometimes point to real places. Could giants represent a similar case? A myth that masks a lost reality? The question of suppression looms large. Were giant skeletons truly hidden away by institutions, as some claim, or did they simply disintegrate, get lost, or turn out to be misidentified? The truth may be more mundane, but the effect is the same. The absence of definitive evidence fuels speculation. It creates a vacuum into which legends rush, growing stronger with each retelling. And perhaps that, in itself, is part of the mystery. Giants remain elusive because the very idea of them challenges established boundaries. To acknowledge them would mean revising not only anthropology, but the entire arc of our human self-conception. There is also the possibility that giants are remembered not because of their prevalence, but because of their rarity. In a world where the average man stood 5.5 feet tall, even a 7-foot-tall individual would have appeared otherworldly. Imagine encountering a tribe in which several men reached 8 feet or more, figures who towered over their contemporaries, whose strength seemed superhuman. They would have inspired both reverence and terror, their memory magnified into myth long after their bones had crumbled to dust. Perhaps giants were never common, but their impact was so profound that they left an outsized mark on human memory. Consider, too, the flood myths. Nearly every culture remembers a time when water swept across the world, cleansing it of its former inhabitants. Often, these stories speak of giants perishing in the deluge. The Old Testament says the Nephilim lived on earth in those days, and also afterward, but were eventually diminished. Greek myths describe the Titans overthrown and imprisoned in Tartarus. The Hopi speak of worlds destroyed before ours, with certain beings swept away in cataclysms. What if these stories are dim cultural memories of real extinction events, moments when unusual populations, perhaps including giants, were wiped away by disaster? If so, the giants are not just myths. They are warnings, reminders of a time when humanity shared the earth with others, beings larger, stronger, and possibly more advanced. Their disappearance would then symbolize a reset, a turning of the page in human history, after which ordinary-sized humans inherited the world. But why does the idea of giants still captivate us? Perhaps because they embody something we feel we have lost. In an age of machines and technology, giants represent raw physicality, unmediated strength, and a scale of being beyond the ordinary. They are reminders of mystery, of the unknown chapters in our past. To entertain the possibility of giants is to acknowledge that history may be incomplete, that the world still hides secrets in its stones, its bones, and its myths. And so we return to the question, did giants really walk the earth? The evidence is tantalizing but not conclusive. Myths from every corner of the globe insist they did. Newspaper clippings and archaeological oddities suggest they may have. Genetic puzzles leave room for unknown lineages. Architecture on a colossal scale seems to hint at builders larger than ourselves. Yet the definitive proof, the intact skeletons, the undisputed artifacts, remains elusive. Perhaps that is the final lesson. The story of giants may not be about certainty, but about possibility. It may be less about proving that giants once lived, and more about realizing how much of the human story remains hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. In the end, whether giants were real flesh and blood beings or archetypal figures of myth, their presence across cultures tells us something profound. Humanity has always sensed that the world is larger, stranger, and more mysterious than we are taught to believe. Maybe giants walked the earth, maybe they did not. But the fact that we still ask the question, that we still search caves, unearth bones, and pore over ancient texts for clues, shows that the mystery is alive. And perhaps that is the true evidence hidden in plain sight. Not just bones or stones, but the enduring human instinct to remember, to wonder, and to imagine that long ago, among the ruins and the mountains, there walked beings so large that even today, their shadows tower over us.